Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 26th, 2015. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, homebrewer Dan Kuczmarski returns with another experiment. This time, Dan split a blonde ale between 4 different yeast strains. How will they perform? Which will we like best? Stay tuned to see. If you're new to home brewing or would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on Google Plus, too. Thanks again, everybody, clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. You know the drill. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, go to our website first, basicbrewing.com. Click on our associate link on the right-hand side of the page, where you can afterwards shop to your content, or heart's content. Anyway, shop a lot on Amazon. The experience won't cost you any extra, but the good part is that you'll be helping us to bring you this show. We greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well that work in a similar fashion. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry Podcast Directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. Thanks again to everybody who has done so already. We've got a lot of show to get to, but before we do, let's take a quick look into the mailbag. Matt from Virginia writes in with this. Matt says, I came across something while listening to another podcast, only to fill the void between your Thursday podcasts, that I thought you might find interesting. Matt says, the podcast is Radiolab. I've listened to Radiolab many, many times, and they were doing an episode on guts. And one of the first stories they went into was on how certain ingested bacteria can potentially alter brain chemistry and have an impact on mood. The study they did was on rats, and the bacteria, Lactobacillus. To summarize, Matt says, a neuroscientist fed large amounts of Lactobacillus to mice and then tested their levels of anxiety by throwing them into bowls of water. The results showed a significant decrease of anxiety in the mice with the Lactobacillus. Long story short, scientists are now studying the effects of yogurt and pure Lactobacillus as a treatment for anxiety and increased levels of GABA and serotonin. I couldn't help but think that if yogurt helps decrease anxiety because it contains Lactobacillus, imagine combining its effects with beer. It could become an anxiety superdrug. There you go. If that is true, Mike Tonsmeyer must be one laid-back guy. That's all I got to say. Appreciate that, Matt. So sour beers may be good for you. Now let's get on with the main event. You may remember Dan Kuczmarski from his experiment dosing different beers post-bottling with the Brettanomyces and Lactobacillus. So Dan may be laid back as well because of that. In this week's experiment, Dan goes back to a more basic approach and plays with the blonde ale style. Dan Kuczmarski, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you, James. It's good to be back.
Now, this experiment is a little less ambitious than the first one that we got together on. The other one, you were dosing beer post-bottling with different critters, and that was a lot of fun to go through. But you kind of went back to the basics with this one.
Yeah, after reviewing what I did with the critter dosing and correcting problematic beers, I just wanted to go back and pick a simple beer style, make sure that my ducks were in a row, if you will, and make sure that since I had introduced things like Brett and Lactobacillus to my home, that I could still brew a clean beer.
That's a good point. Are you forever a funky brewer?
Yeah.
Can you go
Part,
back?
it seems like dodged the bullet on that one.
No, definitely. These were all very clean beers, and I had the opportunity to taste all of the samples. So describe the experiment.
Well, the beer I chose to go with, the style, was a blonde ale, and the methodology that I used was actually to go to Yeast site and look at the preferred yeasts that they recommended and use all of them in fermentation from the same wort. So that I could get an idea of what the yeast characteristics of those beasts would be. Also, I chose the blonde because while it's hopped, it's minimally hopped, and it just gave me a basis for looking for a simple beer with a modest grain bill, and to identify, the unique qualities of each of the different yeasts, because going forward, I also wanted to sort of develop a house strain, if you will. Reviewing some of the old information on basic brewing, I was astounded when I think it was Avery Brewing talked about so many of their styles being done with a common yeast. Me, on the other hand, as a small home brewer, I was coming up with all of these different configurations based on recommendations. So I'd have a different yeast for this strain, and one style would have one yeast, another style would have a different yeast. And I'm just trying to simplify things here at home.
And that makes sense if you want to repitch from one batch to another, to economize or to, streamline your process in that way. If you could find a yeast that you like across different styles, that would be handy.
Exactly. And with regard to the repitching, although I don't think I'll do this during one of your episodes, I think with Avery, they were up to either 500 or 800 successive brewings with the same yeast. And, that just sort of intrigued me.
Yeah, that was Arcadia in Kalamazoo that we visited. And I can't remember, I think it might have been the Ringwood strain that they used. I can't remember. Listeners will have to go back in the archives, and some of them are shouting at their pod players at this point because they know the answer because they've listened to it more recently than I.
Right.
But first of all, let's talk about your recipe for the blonde ale.
Okay. Well, the grain bill was pretty straightforward. It was, let me just find it here. Okay, well, I can't find it, but I can remember it. It was effectively 80% pale two-row, about maybe 16% of Durst Vienna malt, and 4% of caramalt. And so just a simple grain bill. Mm-hmm. The water was actually RO water, and I added just enough chemistry to be true to style. And I used the Easy Water website to help me through that.
And what about hops?
The hops, it was a single hop. I used Simcoe. I'll touch on that now. After the fact, after I had already brewed it, some of the literature search I did indicated, well, if you're going to brew a blonde, don't use Simcoe. But it seems to have worked for me, and in Steve's review of the tasting, he picked up on some real subtle notes. And while I think they may have been due to the particular yeast strain for that sample, what he described also describes some of the characteristics of Simcoe hop. So once again, being the beer style that it is, there wasn't that much hop, and so I don't think I did any undue damage.
No, I didn't think the hopping was inappropriate for the style. It didn't get in the way of the beer. It didn't stand out in an unusual way, in my opinion. So talk about the 4 yeast strains.
Okay, I'll touch on that for just a minute. I wanted to point out that this was sort of on the low end for a mash. Okay, I targeted 148 degrees, and that's kind of relevant, I think, because it was a low gravity beer and intentionally done on the dry side. And these yeasts that I did use behaved very distinctly in that particular wort.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
and this was just to clarify, this was all the same wort. You brewed a big batch of wort and split it up. It wasn't a rebrewing of the same recipe.
No, it was one batch of 16 gallons of wort, and after I went and siphoned it out of the boil kettle, I made sure that everything was really mixed up well, and then divided it into 4 carboys of 4 gallons of wort each.
Okay. And then the fermentation temperature?
Fermentation temperature, it was 100. It was 66 degrees plus or minus 2. I actually chilled the wort to 62 degrees out of the boil kettle, and then pitched. The 12 hours later, everything was at 65, and then I made sure that nothing went above 68 or below 66 at that point.
So we're, for the Celsius among us, around 20.
Subtract 32 and multiply by 5/9.
I'm looking at a chart. I'm cheating. It's around 20 degrees Celsius, around there somewhere. 68 would be around 20.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the yeast strains.
Okay. Well, I did use Y yeast strains, and the first one I used was 1098, which they describe as a British ale. The second one is 1099, which is the Whitbread ale. Oh, and I should also point out that the equivalent of the 1098 is White Lab 007. And I have used both of those interchangeably, and to me they are identical yeasts.
Okay. For
the 1099 Whitbread, the charts that I've been able to find all say that there is not a direct substitute, but if you go to the White Lab site and do a search on Whitbread, they come up with a platinum strain they call WLP017.
Okay.
The third yeast was 1272. It's Y Yeast's American Ale number 2 yeast, and its direct equivalent is White Lab 051. And the fourth yeast is Y Yeast 1332, which is their Northwest Ale strain. And once again, I could not find a direct corollary in the White Labs library. Some independent sites on the web say 005, but I just don't know about that.
Okay. So maybe at this point we should go to the sensory stuff, the tastings, and then we can talk about the details of how each performed afterwards.
Okay.
So the first tasting is with me and Steve Wilkes here in Studio A, B, whatever it is. And then the second one is with Andy Sparks in the back of the home brewery. Well, Steve Wilkes, here we are again.
In the tasting studio.
Now we have 4 beers here. They are all blonde ale. And first of all, they're all very well made. They're all tasty beers.
Yeah, they're really nice beers. And the point of the exercise is to take a look at the difference between 4 yeasts. Mm-hmm. And the wort is the exact same wort that was split out. Is that right?
As I understand it, yes.
Okay. The beers are lovely in color. They're a little darker than I expect a blonde to be. So we'll call it an ash blonde. But a lovely color. And the hop characteristics for the beers are correct, in my opinion. Not that I'm a big style guy, but they taste like a blonde ale ought to taste as far as the hop build and all that. So good experiment.
Okay, so we don't know. We're not familiar with the Y yeast numbers.
No.
We're generally White Labs guys, just because that's what Andy stocks.
Yeah.
So we can talk about these numbers without influencing our expectations.
Right.
So let's go down the line. 1098. What did you think of 1098?
It was a lovely year. The Pope was strong that year, but he was French. Oh, you mean the beer? Sorry.
I was thinking of 1066, but that's the Hastings yeast.
That's right. I liked it. Okay, I'm going to say this to all 4. I like the beer a lot. It's really a nice drinking beer. What struck me about it when I first tasted it was that there was a kind of pronounced esteriness at the back of the flavor profile to me. Almost just ever so slightly like a little bit of a bubblegum kind of flavor. Not very strong. I mean, I'm splitting hairs here, but I did notice it. So it had kind of that little bit of a juicy fruit kind of thing in my taste. I think the beer is eminently drinkable. It's a clean beer. They're all clean. It doesn't have a heavy spice profile to me, and that's important because as we move along, 1 or 2 of these do, as far as I'm concerned.
Do you notice any difference in the clarity in your beers?
No, not really.
I poured mine second, so on each of these, so that yours would be a better indication, probably.
I really don't. They really all look to be about the same. I might think that the number 4 beer, which would be the 1332, also a lovely little year in the Middle Ages, that might be the most clear. Clear's not really the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but that's the beer that you can see through the most easily.
Okay, that's off the subject.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, we move on to 1099.
Okay.
I'll go first on this one.
All right.
To me, this was the most different of the 4. To me, the malt character really came out in this one. And to me, there was a roastiness that came out that was perceivably different from the rest. The bitterness in number 1 in the 1098 beer was the bitterness was in the 1098 beer was fairly sharp and crisp. The bitterness in the 1099 beer to me is a little subdued compared to the first, and that roast character or the malt character really comes through to me.
I agree with that. I don't have anything to add to it. I agree with that. I'm noticing as they open up a little bit, as they've warmed just a little bit, that my initial perception of the 1098 beer, the first beer, is changed a little. It doesn't have that soft estery thing anymore in it. I just took a little sip and I thought, oh, where'd that go? Now maybe the other beers have blotted that out. I don't know, but that was interesting to me anyway.
Okay, beer number 3 is the 1272. The 72. And we don't have an envelope this time, so we can't do any Karnak jokes.
Again, just a really lovely beer.
It's got some fruity esters.
Yep.
Not overpowering.
No.
But in comparison to the previous one, it's.
I think it's pretty caramely. It's got some kind of caramel notes and a little bit of a spiciness to it that I like.
Yeah, it's more. It's probably more balanced as far as whereas the 1098 was kind of hoppy as far as being bitter.
Yeah.
1099 was more malty.
Yeah.
The 1272 is more kind of balanced, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I do want to say that while they are different, they're not a lot different.
Right.
They're
Right.
these yeasts are. I think that we're going to find that they're all in the same family of yeasts. In other words, none of these are like Belgian weirdo, Flanders. These are all pretty much, in the same
Stupid Flanders.
Stupid Flanders. Yeah.
A Simpsons reference for those who don't. I'll be the golf announcer.
That's right.
James and Steve just made a Simpsons reference.
My cat's breath smells like tuna.
Tastes like burning.
Oh, God.
Okay, and the 1332. It's got a nice bitterness level, but it is fruity as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think it has the most spice notes. Not the most Spice Girls notes. But because if you want to be my
Stop! Steve just made a Spice Girls reference.
This one has a kind of a black pepper, grains of paradise kind of thing. Again, pretty slight. We're splitting rails here, but that's a difference that as I said earlier. Number one, the 1098 didn't have anything kind of extra going on, and this one seems like there's some spice notes, some herb notes, or some black pepper, or some grains of paradise, something like that. Which I have to assume that because the way the experiment is constructed, or the experiment that. The only thing that can cause that difference is the yeast. And that's very interesting because, again, from my perspective, you've got 4 yeasts here that are giving us pretty much the same beer. I mean, they're really not much different. But if you're really wanting to tweak it into a particular, really nudge it into a particular place, this is a place that you can really tweak your beers without a tremendous amount of effort, if that's a good way to put it. That we definitely have 4 different beers here, and they're definitely worth playing with, and everybody's palate is different, so that things that I might find to be very subtle, others might find to be very different, wildly different, and vice versa. So it's a really interesting thing to do, and I'm quite impressed with this.
Your favorite?
My favorite is the 1332.
Really?
Yeah, I really like it.
My favorite was the 1099. Maybe just because it was different.
Maybe.
But it I like that malt character.
And I like the black pepper notes. I mean, that's the thing that stood out to me. And in fact, I would argue that to my palate, that was the most different beer. But I'm getting a different difference. It depends what is.
Steve just made a 90s reference. Well, we've got another set of these, and I'm going to look for a candidate to sample the second set. Well, here we are back in the birthplace of Basic Brewing Radio with Andy Sparks.
It's great to be here, James.
Here in the back of thehomebrewery.com in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And we have 4 samples of a blonde ale in front of us as the train moans its lonesome whistle in the background. These samples are a little bit warmer than the temperature that Steve and I sampled yesterday, so it's kind of a different experience. I have some of the same thoughts, but what are your thoughts, Andy, on these 4 samples?
Well, I really love doing these kind of experiments, but it always kind of drives home, how little I probably really know about beer and how good a taster I am. They definitely are all different. Some of them have kind of body differences, and some have kind of like estery fruitiness differences for me. But they're all pretty similar.
Shall we go on down the line? Sure. The first one, number 1, 1098.
Okay. So 1098 I found was had a little more body than the other ones, and maybe a little more of a malty character than some of the other ones. And I really like this one. It also had kind of a little kind of estery apple character, I thought.
Yeah, as I'm tasting these warmer, there are more fruity esters coming out in the flavor, definitely, than yesterday. What do you think of the bitterness level as compared to the other 3?
I found the bitterness level between all of them to be very similar. This one is a little softer, and it might be because it has more body.
Number 2 is 1099. Another swig of that, 1099.
All right, that's a nice beer. It tends to have the most head retention of all the beers that we have in front of us. And as I look across at yours, it seems to also be the case on your cups too. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's a little deceiving. It just might be the cup or the way it was poured. But it also has a lot of body, a nice malty sweetness, kind of a bready or cereal kind of thing going on in it. And I like this one.
Yeah, I agree. Cereal is a good description. It's very, very, to me, it's the most kind of grainy. Has the most kind of grainy character, and that is a perception that I picked up yesterday, and I'm getting it today as well. So,
yeah, nice. It's kind of got like a little bit of a cookie thing going on.
Number 3 is the 1272. 1272.
And this one I found to be more effervescent and a little thinner. I don't know whether it was just a priming thing on this beer or not, but to me it seems a little lighter in body.
And what about the balance between the bitterness and the maltiness? And
it's nice. It's a little, for me, the thinness tends to give it a little more of a harsher bitterness, not quite as balanced. But yeah, it's difficult. They're very close.
And then the last is 1332. They're all good. It's tough. They're all good.
This one to me has more of the kind of fruity esters going on. I kind of more almost like an ale, kind of aromatically. Some kind of apple and some kind of maybe pear or something going on in the nose. It also has a nice balance. I would probably say it has a little more bitterness than the other ones, but or the first couple that I had. But not much. Very, very similar.
Do you have a favorite?
I probably would go with number 2, the one that we talked about having more of a cereal character. Being a blonde beer, it's nice to have some kind of flavor notes to go, to find in the back of the beer.
Yeah, I agree. Two is my favorite, and I don't know if it's because it's to me the most different, and stands out that way.
Right.
But I do like that, like you said, the kind of cereal, grainy character. To me, this would make if you were going to make a nice English session ale, this would be a nice yeast to do.
Right. Yeah. It's quite delicious. These are always good experiments when you get to see how the subtle differences are between just one variable.
Very nice. Any more thoughts?
I'd like to have some more.
I want some more, please. All right. Very nice. Thank you, Andy.
No problem. Glad to be here, buddy.
So there you go. As usual, I'm always relieved to find that beers that are sent to me are good, and there's my luck's going to run out at some point. But good job, Dan, on brewing nice, clean beers. There were, in my opinion, there were some kind of surprising things with the tastings. The most interesting thing that popped out for me was the Whitbread and the 1099 and how different it tasted from all the others, and how kind of I think Andy called it cereally or grainy that beer tasted, and that may be because of the performance. Talk about the performance, the attenuation of these four.
Well, in the case of the 1099, it had the lowest attenuation, and based on the calculators I've used, attenuation was at 62%, and it yielded ABV of 4.5. So I started with, across the board, the words were 1056 to start with, and the final gravity on the Whitbread was 1.021. So not that much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as a baseline, that's where we are. If you look at the 1098 one, which had a distinctly different profile, it attenuated down to 1.014, as did the 1272 strain. The 1332 Northwest strain attenuated all the way down to 1.010. Giving it an attenuation of 82%. So between the four strains that I tested, pretty dramatic difference in attenuation, with the 1099 being lowest, 1332 being the highest, and both the 1098 and 1272 being intermediate between the two of those.
Yeah, I was surprised by those numbers, but it was interesting that I didn't detect that much of a difference in the mouthfeel between the beers. That wasn't one thing that I don't think any of us commented on, was that one was significantly more than the others. How did your tasting notes compare with ours?
For me, the mouthfeel of the Whitbread was higher. It just had more body to it. It felt it had sort of a luscious quality to it. It was malty, and it was filling to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that it did have a little bit more body. Also, in a very bright and clear beer. It was, for me, the clearest of all of the strains tested.
How did the strains compare in performance observed during fermentation?
Very comparable. I monitored it, and of course, the one that attenuated the least dropped at seemingly a slower rate, but it reached its final gravity within a day of everything else. So by, I would say, 7 days, I hadn't seen any change, and by 9 days, they were real stable. So it all happened pretty quick. And I would point out that when I did pitch the yeast, I had started with the smack packs, but I did run them through a yeast starter, a 2-liter yeast starter, just because I tend to, I wanted to make sure that I kept these at a little bit lower temperature, and I wanted to make sure that there were plenty of yeast to get the job done.
Yeah, 2 liters. if you look at a yeast pitching calculator, I'll bet you that 2 liters is seen as over pitching.
Yeah, it would be, but and this is just based on my experience, the way I handle things. If I don't over pitch, things don't always work out so well.
Well, regardless of the pitch rate, you did see differences in the characters of the yeast. So it would be interesting to see if a lower pitch rate, or if you went straight from the smack pack as opposed to making a starter, if that would accentuate those characteristics even more.
And one would predict that if they were pitched at a little bit lower rate. But once again, the way I do things, I just wanted to err on the side of making sure there were enough yeast there.
And a blonde ale is not a style known for its yeast character.
Right.
It's a fairly clean style. Again, my conclusion from the tasting is just, I want to get my hands on some of that 1099 and do some, like low gravity English session beers, to bring out that, to see if I can bring out that character that I was picking up, that kind of malty character.
I know that was your favorite, and it's among my focus group here. I live in a population of bimodal people. They either love the 1099 or it's the worst of the group.
Two shades of gray.
Yeah. It's a fun beer. It's highly reliable, and if one is going to repitch and you don't maintain it real active, it has always come back for me really quick, as opposed to any of a whole host of other yeasts. But and that's one thing I'm looking at going forward. If I'm going to have a house strain, I want to make sure that I can be a little bit neglectful and still be able to pull it up. So, and that's been a good choice for me.
Now, in your write-up on the experiment, you have some observations. You call them observations and dope slaps at the end.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of those had to, I sort of beat this thing to death before I brewed it, and then after I brewed it, I saw the out of an article from BYO. It says, "Don't use Simcoe, not for blondes," and that I immediately went, "Oh!" So, but it's okay.
Well, and you used a single hop addition at the beginning of the boil, right?
Let me go back to that. Actually, no, I did the majority of hops at 60 minutes at the beginning of the boil, but then I also had a 30-minute and a 15-minute.
Oh, okay.
So perhaps another dope slap is in order, because really bittering is all you want to bring to this. And I managed to get aroma and flavor in there. So
it was good. Whatever you did, it was good. I wouldn't. If it was an accident, it was a happy accident. The beer was good. So,
but once again, testimony to you play with things, and I did what perhaps I wouldn't have done if I had read the article before I brewed. And it worked out okay.
You said that when in one of your notes you said Steve's historical references are quite accurate. And in 1098, the Pope was French, possibly married and involved in the Crusades.
Yeah, there's a lot more than just beer here with this podcast, because I go and I check everything everybody says, and sure enough, I would not have expected a French Pope. And turns out he was a pretty tough dude.
and I get a point for the 1066 reference, I would say.
Yes.
But that's an easier one. Papal history is not my strong point. So you were wondering whether mashing at a higher temp would have shifted the flavor profiles more toward the malt. Again, these were not so dry. I mean, the driest one was 1010.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll tell you what. Let me just touch on the 1098 for a minute, because it is the 1099 and 1098 are both British ales, and with everything I've done with them, they impart that British je ne sais quoi to the style, whereas the other two are American yeasts. Well, arguably the Northwest came from Britain at some time, but the 1098 is considerably drier, a really sharp and crisp beer for me. And so it's a good comparison between the two of those to get two very distinct qualities of a British ale out of a common wort.
Yeah, I was thinking that the British ale accentuated the bitterness better than the American ale too, which was a surprise to me.
I had a little bit of trouble distinguishing between bitterness and, if you will, a carbonic sharpness to it. The 1098 had a very distinct upfront bite, and it wasn't unpleasant. It was sharp, but I didn't know if it was really from the hops or if it was just the yeast doing something weird. I don't know. The 1272, and I apologize, this is hard for me to follow, and I'm looking at a sheet. The 1272 and 1098 attenuated identically. And whereas there was more crispness in the 1098 up front, I picked up more malt up front on the 1272. But then the bitter came through on the 1272 at the finish. And the 1098, it just seemed to smooth out and have a little bit of stone fruit quality to it.
And again, the 1098 is British ale. The 1099 is Whitbread, and 1272 is American Ale 2, and,
right.
And 1332 is Northwest Ale. For those who are jogging and can't look it up on the computer.
Okay, I'll tell you what, if I may only point out one thing, I did all of this based on the recommendations from Y Yeast, but there's another yeast that I have played with from Y Yeast that unfortunately doesn't seem to have an analog or a comparable variety in the White Labs, and it is 1469. And it is, it wasn't part of this experiment, but it behaves in attenuation-wise very much like the 1099. So if people kind of like the 1099, that 1469, which is the West Yorkshire yeast. And then, that having been said, if you actually go to White Labs and type in Yorkshire, they come up with 037. So maybe, some of the reference guides just haven't picked up on that, but White Labs does have something from Yorkshire, and they say it's a Timothy Taylor brewery product.
Okay. Yeah, I have to admit I've been kind of lazy recently, or the past few years, and I use dry yeast mostly. And it's just for ease of pitching. You don't have. I don't make a starter with the dry yeast, and just because of my schedule, because when opportunity arises to brew, I like to be able to kind of hit the ground running without having to plan ahead a couple days in making a starter and preparing that way. Although, White Labs swears up and down that you don't need a starter. I went to a presentation at the Homebrewers Conference, was it last year or year before, where the presenter said that, you don't need a starter for liquid yeast. You don't need a starter for one of our vials. And everybody in the crowd was like, technically I guess you don't need it. But there's just something reassuring about seeing, fermentation activity more quickly by using a starter. I get kind of nervous when I don't see anything happening after 24 hours.
Yeah.
When I just say pitch a vial. So anyway, that's maybe a tangent, but I would like to get it back into using the liquid yeasts, because you do get more variety in the character of the beers when you do play with different yeast strains. Although there are good dry yeast strains out there now that are more interesting. It's not just a single strain of ale yeast out there. There's other stuff to play with.
Yeah, I'm kind of off the charts geeky about this stuff. So and I have the good fortune of being retired, so I try and plan this stuff out, and and in doing so, it's just a lot of fun for me. The process is as much fun as drinking the beer.
Yeah, I agree. You're a lucky man, Dan.
Yeah, in many ways.
So what's the next experiment that you'll be playing with?
For me, the favorite yeast is the 1272. I like the flavor profile on it, and I'm going to stop reading the references and just go with the different styles that I like. And even though it's not on the chart, 1056, which is the Chico strain, or White Labs 001, I think, they're California ale yeast.
Right.
That is just renowned as, a go-to by so many people. So 2015 is the year of doing a trial comparison of every style of beer that I like, and I'm going to compare 1272 to 1056, Y Yeast 1056, which is White Labs 001. And I am confident that nothing untoward is going on with my brew system after having brought the Brett in, and just look at what I can do between the two strains with the different styles. And you had alluded to her, and then I sort of took you off track, I think. But this was a mash at a low temperature. If I bring the temperature up a little bit, I think I could actually push the 1099 on a blonde style beer. So it would be a little bit too thick and a little bit too malty, and maybe have some of the other yeasts, some of the other yeast do things to the work that would mimic what the 1099 did when it was a drier mash.
Mm-hmm. There's so many variables to play with in the brewing process. I have, just to preview upcoming episodes, I have I've done an experiment on a cream ale that I split in half and pitched half of it with the Danstar Nottingham yeast, and then half with US-05. And there's some surprising things going on there in my tasting profiles, and I'm working with someone here locally to get some IBU testing as well. So, so that should be interesting. But split batches are a lot of fun to play with, and this is a great illustration of it. I mean, this is another way to get to know your ingredients.
Very much so. I just after I did the critter dosing experiment, I was almost confounded by how complicated my brewing had gotten. And, I went back and listened to your interview with Jack McAuliffe, and I think you alluded to you were pen in hand ready to write down his recipe. And he said, well, this is the grain bill, and the only hops available to me were Cascade because nobody else wanted them. So, it really is taking me to getting to know my product without having to get too complicated. And, if I can throw a plug into your show, hops were probably something that I have known less about than any of the other products. And on September 1st of 2005, which I think was your inaugural year, you had an interview with Gerard Lemmings, and I learned so much about hops from that episode. And in particular, I always pull things right out of the freezer and, to keep them maximally fresh. Mm-hmm. And he pointed out the benefits of aging your yeast or your hops at room temperature for 24 hours before incorporating them. And I do believe it makes a big difference. So there you have it.
I'm going to have to go back and listen to that show.
I think you actually had two with him, and it was either that one or the follow-up. But, just so illuminating to me on stuff that's out there that, I've been too busy trying to complicate things. It's good to take a step back like this.
Sure. Well, very good. This has been a lot of fun, Dan, and I hope that you'll keep us in mind in the future.
Indeed, James. Thank you.
Thanks again to Dan. I'm definitely going to have to play with that Whitbread yeast. I like that flavor profile a lot. I appreciate Dan for all his hard work in putting that experiment together, and, of course, to Steve and Andy for letting me borrow their taste buds. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. Please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We greatly appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Heat Factory Pop Top Mittens with glove liner for use with Heat Factory hand warmers, and the Think Geek Ringtone Annoyatron, which is a little device that you can hide somewhere and it will randomly play different cell phone ringtones. I kind of like that. Thanks again. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to BYO Magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.